Begin tonight's meeting with the invocation by Councilor Miles, followed by the Pledge of Allegiance.
Lord, we just thank you, Lord God, in this season of Thanksgiving here for all the blessings that you have bestowed upon our city, Father. As we look across the country, Lord, there is so much violence, turmoil, and tension. And Father, we just thank you for things being as well as they are in our city, because they could be a lot worse. And so, Father, I pray, too, that we will remind ourselves daily that we do not have to be that city that others say that we are. We are so much better, Lord. Father, bless our mayor, our city officials, and each council member represented here tonight. Lord, fill our hearts with humility and a spirit of oneness and purpose and vision for our city. Guide our minds, Lord, tonight as we make decisions for our city. Help us to be men and women of character and integrity in all that we do. In Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. We'll have the clerk call the roll.
Mr. Gordon?
Here.
Mr. McLean?
Here.
Mr. Lowe?
Here.
Mr. Tevin?
Here.
Miss Adams?
Here.
Mr. Glenn?
Here.
Mrs. Miles?
Here.
And Mr. Nixon.
Here. Are there any amendments to tonight's agenda?
Mr.
McLean?
President, we would need to add Henry Houston and also John Bowker to the privilege of the floor, please.
Motion the second is to amend tonight's agenda by adding Henry Houston and John Boker to the privilege of the floor. Is there any discussion? All those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? The motion carries. First, under privilege of the floor is Henry Houston. If you'd please come forward, state your name and address for the record, and I'll remind both speakers that privilege of the floor rules for council allow for 3 minutes.
Okay. My name is Henry L. Houston. I'm a lifelong resident of Lima, Ohio. And my address is 626 West Elm Street.
Thank you.
Okay, Mr. President and fellow council members, as I said, my name is Henry L. Houston, who serves as the chair for Criminal Justice and Legal Redress Committee for the Lima NAACP chapter. The NAACP have met and have had very good conversations with Chief Martin about the situation here in Lima and the types of policing that they're engaged in. The conversations were good, but still we have the same issues with complaints coming in about the way that the Lima Police Department is treating our citizens in the African American community. Our request is that City Council refer the issue of pinpoint policing. And for those of you who don't understand what pinpoint policing is, it's just a cosmetic cover for racial profiling. They're the same. And we want the council to refer this policy of law enforcement and their strategies to the appropriate council committee. This would allow the committee to look into the precise manner of pinpoint policing that's being administered in our community, allowing the Lima Police Department to fully explain how the program works and to generate a discussion on whether that type of policing and enforcement is the best method for our community. Now, most of you on the City Council are too young to remember some of the history about Lima. Lima back in the 40s, 50s, and 60s was highly regarded. It was an industrial powerhouse and also a place that everybody wants to come to work and live. And also, with the population being up in the 60,000 plus, and industry as heavy as it was back then, the city didn't have any problem with generating revenue, tax revenue. But once we've had problems with the manner in which the police department chose to do its policing in our community, racial tensions escalated, and it erupted to the point where the National Guard had to come in, and also residents took notice of what was going on in the city. Industry seen that the atmosphere in this city wasn't conducive to doing business here, so they started taking flight and residents started leaving. So the fix is simple. If we want to restore this city to what it used to be, with all of the good that this city has to offer, I just implore you to take a closer look and try to change the manner in which policing is done. Because if you want this city to blossom again into what it used to be, the fix is simple. Just treat everybody with respect and dignity. Instead of all of these stops, unjust laws on the book, specifically giving officers the discretion as to who they want to stop, which 95% of the time are African Americans, just to extract monies from them when they get to the court system, to make up for that deficit of tax revenue that has left the city, and it's wrong, morally wrong, and it's unjust. So my last stop that I had by one of the officers, I gave you a copy of it. You can read it and give you some kind of insight as to what's going on in the city. I appreciate it, and thank you very much.
Thank you.
Mr. President,
Mr. Glenn?
Mr. Laney's, we will be having calling for a meeting with the COP officers.
Okay.
Do an overview on the things they're doing.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Glenn. Next is Mr. John Boker.
Mr. President, members of the council, number one, thank you for this opportunity. I'm going to give you a report on my bucket list. And if that sounds a little weird, that's because you don't know me very well. But when my wife and I were blessed to be able to move down here to Lima in June of 2013, I put together a bucket list. Because as a community advocate, I am somebody who does not sit and complain about things. I am somebody, God willing, that I have the strength to step up and solve problems. My ego will not allow me to try and solve it by myself because I know that I cannot. The key word in my vocabulary is collaboration. This is a beautiful, wonderful, big-hearted community. Part of the problem is people don't work together. They work individually, they do wonderful work, but they could do so much more with so much better result with half the effort if they'd work together. So, in the spirit of working together, one of the first things on my bucket list was to get the mental health levy passed, the one that did not pass. So Mike Shanehofer and I sat down and we put together a campaign, and with Bobby Spence's help, we passed the levy. Yay! Okay, number two, 211. We now have a 211, sponsored by United Way. Phil Hain took the lead on this after we had a lengthy brunch, and we now have anyone needing help can dial 211 wherever they are, if they can get to a phone, whether they need food, whether they need shelter, clothing, education, a job, health, substance abuse. 211 will make an immediate referral. No more running from place to place, knocking on doors, begging to see somebody to help them. Done. The Ken Scott Community Volunteer Center, again under the sponsorship of United Way, opened last week. Another item on the bucket list Bill and I talked about. We now have and will have a volunteer directory for anyone coming to the community, in the community, needing help, calls in. What type of help do you need? And there will be a list of volunteers who have submitted their names, and there will be a matchup. It's kind of an eHarmony for community help. That was supposed to be humorous. Y'all looking way too grim. Loosen up now, come on. Okay, the biggie. I know, the biggie. The tracks are fixed. When I stood before you a couple times, you probably thought I was smoking something in the parking lot and before I came in. And I told you, these tracks will be fixed. Well, Chuck McBride finally gave up, hoisted the white flag and said, okay, John, I'll fix the blank blank tracks. So I told him they have to be fixed before the holidays. They are now fixed. They're not to my satisfaction. I already left a message for Chuck saying, 85%. Not 100%, 85%. What's left on John's bucket list? 3 things. A project that Councilman Derry Glenn and I have been working on, and we are about to put some of the final pieces in place, and that is to increase the number of minorities on our police force. No, we did not get together out in the parking lot. Just want to let everybody know. Mr. Mayor, welcome, sir. Shades of Blue, and that was before the TV series. Shades of Blue is the name of the project. And Councilman Glenn can give you an update. We've got another meeting coming up on December 2nd with Rhodes and Apollo. Those are the last 2 pieces in place. Now we need the black pastors to step up and start talking to their congregations about a career as a, catch the new terminology, a community guardian. Not a cop, not a policeman, not a law enforcement, a community guardian, somebody who is there to help guard the community. Oh, this is a biggie also. We need a warming center for our homeless people before we start picking up frozen bodies off the street in December and January and February. Finley has a warming center. Why doesn't Lima? I got people willing to step up and support the cost of it. I need a building, one that the housing department will give us permission to occupy. And last, the air in this community is toxic. And I don't know, I don't want to step on Husky's toes and some more folks because my son has a business here in town, but people in my household are sick. My wife, our health provider, myself, and I've asked Bob Baxter to get me some stats on emergency room visits for respiratory distress. The air in this community is toxic. And that too will change.
Thank you.
Can I have an amen? Can I have an hallelujah? All right.
Next on the agenda is the consent calendar.
Mr. President,
Mr. Tevin.
I move that item A of the consent calendar be received, filed, and approved, and items B, C, and D be received and filed.
Second.
The motion and the second is to receive, file, and approve item A, and to receive, and file items B, C, and D. Is there any discussion? All those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed? Motion carries. Communication number 1.
From the Director of Community Development regarding legislation to place tax assessments.
Mr. President,
Mr. Glenn.
I move that communication number 1, receive and file legislation on the agenda.
Second.
The motion and the second is to receive and file communication number 1. Is there any discussion? All those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed? Motion carries. Communication number 2.
From the Finance Director regarding legislation for budget amendments.
Mr. President,
Mr. Tevin.
I move that communication number 2 be received and filed. Legislation is on tonight's agenda.
Second.
The motion and the second is to receive and file communication number 2. Is there any discussion? All those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? The motion carries. Communication number 3.
From the Deputy Law Director regarding legislation to amend 1402.01 and 1452.02 of the codified ordinances.
Mr. President,
Mr. Glenn.
I move that communication number 3, receive and file, and allow law director to prepare the necessary paperwork for the legislation.
Second.
The motion and the second is to receive and file communication number 3 and to authorize the law director to prepare the necessary legislation. Is there any discussion? All those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed? The motion carries. Communication number 4.
From the Auditor requesting legislation to enter into a contract with Perry Protech.
Mr. President,
Mr. Tevin.
I move that communication number 4 be received and filed, and the law director authorized to prepare the necessary legislation.
Second.
The motion and the second is to receive and file communication number 4 and to authorize the law director to prepare the necessary legislation. Is there any discussion? All those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed? Motion carries. Communication number 5.
From Chief Hefner regarding legislation to enter into an agreement with Rhodes State College.
Mr. President,
Mr. Gordon?
I move that communication number 5 be received and filed, and legislation is on tonight's agenda.
Second.
The motion and the second is to receive and file communication number 5. Is there any discussion? All those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed? Motion carries. Communication number 6.
From the auditor for the contract labor report.
Mr. President,
Mr. Lowe.
I move that communication number 6 be received and filed.
Second.
The motion and the second is to receive and file communication number 6. Is there any discussion? All those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed? The motion carries. Communication number 7.
From the Director of Public Works regarding legislation to expend additional funds for engineering Tech 2.
Mr. President,
Ms. Adams?
I move that communication number 7 be received and filed, and legislation is on tonight's agenda.
Second.
The motion and the second is to receive and file communication number 7. Is there any discussion? All those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed? The motion carries. Communication number 8.
From the Director of Public Works regarding legislation to abate abandoned accumulation of debris.
Mr. President,
Ms. Adams?
I move that communication number 8 be received and filed. Legislation is on tonight's agenda.
Second.
The motion and the second is to receive and file communication number 8. Is there any discussion? All those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? The motion carries. Communication number 9.
From the Director of Public Works regarding legislation to amend Section 412.07 of the codified ordinances.
Mr. President,
Ms. Adams?
I move that communication number 9 be received and filed. Legislation is on tonight's agenda.
Second.
The motion and the second is to receive and file communication number 9. Is there any discussion? All those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed? The motion carries. Communication number 10.
From the Director of Public Works regarding legislation to enter into a contract with Benz Construction.
Mr. President,
Ms. Adams?
I move that communication number 10 be received and filed. Legislation is on tonight's agenda.
Second.
The motion and the second is to receive and file communication number 10. Is there any discussion? All those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed? Motion carries. Communication number 11.
From the Director of Public Works regarding legislation to enter into contractual service agreements for 2016.
Mr. President,
Ms. Adams?
I move that communication number 11 be received and filed. Legislation is on tonight's agenda.
Second.
The motion and the second is to receive and file communication number 11. Is there any discussion? All those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? The motion carries. Communication number 12.
From the Director of Human Resources regarding legislation to enter into an agreement with FOP Gold.
Mr. President,
Mr. Lowe?
I move that communication number 12 be received and filed. Legislation is on tonight's agenda.
Second.
The motion and the second is to receive and file communication number 12. Is there any discussion? All those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed? The motion carries. Communication number 13.
From the Deputy Director of Utilities requesting legislation to renew an agreement with Gray Matter Systems, GE Intelligent Platforms.
Mr. President,
Mr. McLean?
I move that communication number 13 be received and filed and authorize the law director to prepare any necessary legislation.
Second.
The motion and the second is to receive and file communication number 13 and to authorize the law director to prepare any necessary legislation. Is there any discussion? All those in favor of that motion signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed? The motion carries. Next, we have the Safety Services Committee report. Mr. Gordon?
Thank you, Mr. President. The Safety Services Committee met on a moral obligation issue, and all the counselors have received a copy of the minutes, and I'd like to ask that it be received, filed, and approved.
Second.
The motion and the second is to receive, file, and approve. The committee report is submitted by Counselor Gordon. Is there any discussion? All those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed? The Motion carries. Ordinance 233-15.
Amending the 2015 annual budget.
Mr. President,
Mr. Tevin.
I move that ordinance 233-15 be passed on its first reading.
Second.
The motion and the second is to pass ordinance 233-15 on its first reading. Is there any discussion? We'll have the clerk call the roll.
Mrs. Miles?
Yes.
Mr. Nixon?
Yes.
Mr. Gordon?
Yes.
Mr. McLean?
Yes.
Mr. Lowe?
Yes.
Mr. Tevin?
Yes.
Ms. Adams?
Yes.
And Mr. Glenn?
Yes.
Ordinance 233-15 has been passed on its first reading by an 8-0 vote. Ordinance 234-15.
Levying special assessments for property maintenance code charges on premises in the city of Lima, Ohio.
Mr. President,
Mr. Glenn.
I move that ordinance 234-15 be passed on its first reading.
Second.
The motion and the second is to pass ordinance 234-15 on its first reading. Is there any discussion? We'll have the clerk call the roll.
Mrs. Miles?
Yes.
Mr. Nixon?
Yes?
Mr. Gordon?
Yes.
Mr. McLean?
Yes.
Mr. Lowe?
Yes.
Mr. Tevin?
Yes.
Ms. Adams?
Yes.
And Mr. Glenn?
Yes.
Ordinance 234-15 has been passed on its first reading by an 8-0 vote. Ordinance 235-15.
Authorizing the mayor to enter into a collective bargaining agreement with the FOP Ohio Labor Council Gold Unit.
Mr. President,
Mr. Lowe?
I move that ordinance 235-15 be passed on its first reading.
Second.
The motion and the second is to pass ordinance 235-15 on its first reading. Is there any discussion? Will have the clerk call the roll?
Mrs. Miles?
Yes.
Mr. Nixon?
Yes?
Mr. Gordon?
Yes.
Mr. McLean?
Yes.
Mr. Lowe?
Yes.
Mr. Tevin?
Yes.
Ms. Adams?
Yes.
Mr. Glenn?
Yes.
Ordinance 235-15 has been passed on its first reading by an 8-0 vote. Ordinance 236-15.
Authorizing the mayor to enter into a clinical affiliation agreement with James A. Rhodes State College.
Mr. President,
Mr. Gordon.
I move that ordinance 236-15 be passed on its first reading.
Second.
The motion and the second is to pass ordinance 236-15 on its first reading. Is there any discussion? Will have the clerk call the roll?
Mrs. Miles?
Yes.
Mr. Nixon?
Yes.
Mr. Gordon?
Yes.
Mr. McLean?
Yes.
Mr. Lowe?
Yes.
Mr. Tevin?
Yes.
Ms. Adams?
Yes.
And Mr. Glenn?
Yes.
Ordinance 236-15 has been passed on its first reading by an 8-0 vote. Ordinance 237-15.
Authorizing the auditor to pay a claim reimbursement to Douglas Plogger as a moral obligation.
Mr. President,
Mr. Gordon.
I move that ordinance 237-15 be passed on its first reading.
Second.
The motion and the second is to pass ordinance 237-15 on its first reading. Is there any discussion?
Mr. President,
Mr. Glenn.
I want to thank Mr. Gordon, the chairman of the Safety Service Department, did a great job handling the situation. Also, Sam McLean. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Glenn. Is there any further discussion? We'll have the clerk call the roll.
Mrs. Miles?
Yes.
Mr. Nixon?
Yes.
Mr. Gordon?
Yes.
Mr. McLean?
Yes.
Mr. Lowe?
Yes.
Mr. Tevin?
Yes.
Ms. Adams?
Yes.
Mr. Glenn?
Yes.
Ordinance 237 has been passed on its first reading by an 8-0 vote. Ordinance 238-15.
Approving the appointment of Dr. Wilfred Ellis to the Allen County Board of Health.
Mr. President,
Mrs. Miles.
I move that ordinance number 238-15 be passed on its first reading.
Second.
The motion and the second is to pass ordinance 238-15 on its first reading. Is there any discussion? Will the clerk call the roll?
Mrs. Miles?
Yes.
Mr. Nixon?
Yes.
Mr. Gordon?
Yes.
Mr. McLean?
Yes.
Mr. Lowe?
Yes.
Mr. Tevin?
Yes.
Ms. Adams?
Yes.
Mr. Glenn?
Yes.
Ordinance 238-15 has been passed on its first reading by an 8-0 vote. Ordinance 239-15.
Authorizing the mayor to grant 2 easements to Marathon Pipeline.
Mr. President,
Mr. McLean.
I move that ordinance 239-15 be passed on its first reading.
Second.
The motion and the second is to pass ordinance 239-15 on its first reading. Is there any discussion? We'll have the clerk call the roll.
Mrs. Miles?
Yes.
Mr. Nixon?
Yes.
Mr. Gordon?
Yes.
Mr. McLean?
Yes.
Mr. Lowe?
Yes.
Mr. Tevin?
Yes.
Ms. Adams?
Yes.
Mr. Glenn?
Yes.
Ordinance 239-15 has been passed on its first reading by an 8-0 vote. Ordinance 240-15.
Authorizing the mayor to enter into a contract to extend the water line north of Caro.
Mr. President,
Mr. McLean.
I move that ordinance 240-15 be passed on its first reading.
Second.
The motion and the second is to pass ordinance 240-15 on its first reading. Is there any discussion? We'll have the clerk call the roll.
Mrs. Miles?
Yes.
Mr. Nixon?
Yes.
Mr. Gordon?
Yes.
Mr. McLean?
Yes.
Mr. Lowe?
Yes.
Mr. Tevin?
Yes.
Ms. Adams?
Yes.
And Mr. Glenn?
Yes.
Ordinance 240-15 has been passed on its first reading by an 8-0 vote. Ordinance 241-15.
Amending ordinance 279-14.
Mr. President,
Ms. Adams?
I move that ordinance 241-15 be passed on its first reading.
Second.
The motion and the second is to pass ordinance 241-15 on its first reading. Is there any discussion? We'll have the clerk call the roll.
Mrs. Miles?
Yes.
Mr. Nixon?
Yes.
Mr. Gordon?
Yes.
Mr. McLean?
Yes.
Mr. Lowe?
No.
Mr. Tevin?
Yes.
Ms. Adams?
Yes.
And Mr. Glenn?
Yes.
Ordinance 241-15 has been passed on its first reading by a 7-1 vote. Ordinance 242-15.
Authorizing the mayor to enter into contracts with custom staffing for engineering, electrical inspection, and secretarial services.
Mr. President,
Ms. Adams?
I move that ordinance 242-15 be passed on its first reading after having been amended.
You have to amend it first.
I have to amend
You have to
it.
make the motion to amend it.
Mr. President,
Ms. Adams?
I move that ordinance 242 be amended as follows. Under whereas, where the positions are listed, the second position, engineering technician, should read engineering tech 3.
Is there a second on the
Second.
motion?
Second.
Motion the second is to amend ordinance 242-15. In the first whereas, the second position identified, striking the words technician, maps, and survey, and changing it to Tech 3, and to authorize the clerk to provide a clean copy. Is there any discussion? Mr. Geiger?
Was the intent to delete the reference to maps and survey?
I thought it was.
No.
No, just leave it in there,
Yeah.
just change technician to
Yeah.
Tech 3?
Yep.
Okay.
Just add in
Okay, the motion then
Yeah.
is to amend it to say, to strike the word technician or add Tech 3. Add the words Tech 3.
Just engineering technician 3.
There you go. What he said. Okay?
Engineering technician 3.
Are we clear on that? We're just adding the Roman numeral 3.
Right.
And provide a clean copy. Is there any further discussion? All those in favor of that motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Ms. Adams?
Mr. President, I move that ordinance 242-15 be passed on its first reading with the amendment.
Second.
The motion, the second, is to pass ordinance 242-15 on its first reading as amended. Is there any discussion? I'll have the clerk call the roll.
Mrs. Miles?
Yes.
Mr. Nixon?
Yes.
Mr. Gordon?
Yes.
Mr. McLean?
Yes.
Mr. Lowe?
No.
Mr. Tevin?
Yes.
Ms. Adams?
Yes.
And Mr. Glenn?
Yes.
Ordinance 242-15 has been passed on its first reading by a 7-1 vote as amended. Ordinance 243-15.
Authorizing the mayor to enter into a contract with Patrick Staffing, Inc. for engineering technician services.
Mr. President,
Ms. Adams?
I move to amend ordinance 243-15 as follows. Whereas section, it states engineering technician, should have a 4, Roman numeral 4. And then also, under section 1, it's still the first sentence, where it's noted engineering technician, should also have the Roman numeral 4, and provide a clean copy.
Second.
The motion, the second, is to amend ordinance 243-15 in the first whereas by inserting the Roman numeral 4, and in section 1 by inserting the Roman numeral 4, and to provide a clean copy. Is there any discussion? After all my marking on this, we'll need a clean copy. Ms. Adams, all those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
Roll
To
call.
amend. No, this
Oh,
is the
I'm
motion.
sorry.
Aye.
All those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed?
Sorry.
The motion carries.
I
Ms.
thought
Adams.
you were voting no.
Mr. President,
Ms. Adams.
I move that ordinance 243-15 be passed on its first reading as amended.
Second.
The motion, the second, is to pass ordinance 243-15 on its first reading as amended. Is there any discussion? Will have the clerk call the roll.
Thank you.
There you go.
Mrs. Miles?
Yes.
Mr. Nixon?
Yes.
Mr. Gordon?
Yes.
Mr. McLean?
Yes.
Mr. Lowe?
No.
Mr. Tevin?
Yes.
Miss Adams?
Yes.
And Mr. Glenn?
Yes.
Ordinance 243-15 has been passed on its first reading as amended by a 7-1 vote. Ordinance 244-15.
Authorizing the mayor to enter into a contract for plan review services for the 2016 calendar year.
Mr. President,
Miss Adams.
I move that ordinance 244-15 be passed on its first reading.
Second.
The motion on the second is to pass ordinance 244-15 on its first reading. Is there any discussion? We'll have the clerk call the roll.
Mrs. Miles?
Yes.
Mr. Nixon?
Yes.
Mr. Gordon?
Yes.
Mr. McLean?
Yes.
Mr. Lowe?
No.
Mr. Tevin?
Yes.
Miss Adams?
Yes.
And Mr. Glenn?
Yes.
Ordinance 244-15 has been passed on its first reading by a 7-1 vote. Ordinance 245-15.
Authorizing the mayor to enter into a contract for non-certified building inspection services.
Mr. President,
Miss Adams.
I move that ordinance 245-15 be passed on its first reading.
Second.
The motion and the second is to pass ordinance 245-15 on its first reading. Is there any discussion? We'll have the clerk call the roll.
Mrs. Miles?
Yes.
Mr. Nixon?
Yes.
Mr. Gordon?
Yes.
Mr. McLean?
Yes.
Mr. Lowe?
No.
Mr. Tevin?
Yes.
Miss Adams?
Yes.
Mr. Glenn?
Yes.
Ordinance 245-15 has been passed on its first reading by a 7-1 vote. Ordinance 246-15.
Authorizing the mayor to enter into a contract with Dennis Construction for demolition of residential structures during the 2016 calendar year.
Mr. President,
Miss Adams.
I move that ordinance 246-15 be passed on its first reading.
Second.
The motion and the second is to pass ordinance 246-15 on its first reading. Is there any discussion? We'll have the clerk call the roll.
Mrs. Miles?
Yes.
Mr. Nixon?
Yes.
Mr. Gordon?
Yes.
Mr. McLean?
Yes.
Mr. Lowe?
Yes.
Mr. Tevin?
Yes.
Miss Adams?
Yes.
And Mr. Glenn?
Yes.
Ordinance 246-15 has been passed on its first reading by an 8-0 vote. Ordinance 247-15.
Authorizing the mayor to enter into a contract for the purchase of a new step manufacturing asphalt hot box for the Public Works Department.
Mr. President,
Miss Adams.
I move that ordinance 247-15 be passed on its first reading.
Second.
The motion and the second is to pass ordinance 247-15 on its first reading. Is there any discussion? We'll have the clerk call the roll.
Mrs. Miles?
Yes.
Mr. Nixon?
Yes.
Mr. Gordon?
Yes.
Mr. McLean?
Yes.
Mr. Lowe?
Yes.
Mr. Tevin?
Yes.
Miss Adams?
Yes.
And Mr. Glenn?
Yes.
Ordinance 247-15 has been passed on its first reading by an 8-0 vote. Ordinance 248-15.
Establishing an administration fee levied and appropriated on disposal of construction and demolition debris pursuant to Ohio Revised Code 3714.07C.
Mr. President,
Miss Adams.
I move that ordinance 248-15 be passed on its first reading.
Second.
The motion and the second is to pass ordinance 248-15 on its first reading. Is there any discussion? We'll have the clerk call the roll.
Mrs. Miles?
Yes.
Mr. Nixon?
Yes.
Mr. Gordon?
Yes.
Mr. McLean?
Yes.
Mr. Lowe?
Yes.
Mr. Tevin?
Yes.
Miss Adams?
Yes.
And Mr. Glenn?
Yes.
Ordinance 248-15 has been passed on its first reading by an 8-0 vote. Ordinance 249-15.
Amending Section 412.07 of the Codified Ordinances of Lima, Ohio, governing temporary street closings, block parties, and special uses of public ways and city property.
Mr. President,
Miss Adams.
I move that ordinance 249-15 be passed on its first reading.
Second.
The motion and the second is to pass ordinance 249-15 on its first reading. Is there any discussion?
Mr. President,
Mr. McLean.
just for the audience out there, we've had a meeting about this some time ago about, when we have city non-residents, block parties and things like that, and we had a fee for that. And one of the biggest issues we had is when we close up these streets, people were complaining. So we don't close them that often, but when we do, it's for a reason, for that community involvement. And if you're a nonprofit or a for-profit, it's going to be a little more expensive for you than it was the last time. But we're also adding into this a litter control bond. So if someone wants to have a block party, They're going to put a bond up to make sure they're going to leave the premises the way that they found it. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. McLean. Is there any further discussion? Will the clerk call the roll?
Mrs. Miles?
Yes.
Mr. Nixon?
Yes.
Mr. Gordon?
Yes.
Mr. McLean?
Yes.
Mr. Lowe?
Yes.
Mr. Tevin?
Yes.
Miss Adams?
Yes.
And Mr. Glenn?
No.
Ordinance 249-15 has been passed on its first reading by a 7-1 vote. Miscellaneous business, Mrs. Miles.
Thank you, Mr. President. I had the opportunity to attend the Walter Potts dedication of the bridge on Sunday, and it was a very, very nice event here, and the bridge looks really nice, and the plaques that were erected on the bridge looks really, really nice. So I want to say thanks to Saul Allen, to Howard Esco, the county and the state officials who made this dedication possible. Evidently, they had to go through a couple hoops here to get it approved through the county and the state here. And so I'm very, very grateful for making this come to fruition. We memorialized Mr. Potts when he passed away, and this was just another extra in our community that we have done to honor the legacy of a great man in our community. And so it was a great event, and I'm really appreciative of Howard and his staff for making it happen. Lastly, I'd like to just say happy Thanksgiving to everyone as we approach the holiday, the Thanksgiving Day. I just want us to be thankful here. We find a lot that we talk about that is wrong and that is not going right, but I challenge each one of us to think about the things that are going right in our life, to be thankful for our family, for our friends, for our health, and just have a heart of gratitude here as we approach this season here. Yes, there are a lot of things that are wrong. There are a lot of things that need to be fixed here, but I think that we sometimes need to just sit back and say, hey, you know, there are some good things in this city. There are some good people, and there are some good things that are going in here. Sometimes the attitude needs to start with us here, as far as saying those positive things and recognizing some of the good things that are happening in our city. And as I said, you know, there are some things that needs to be fixed in this city, but there also are some good people. There are some good things that are happening in this city, and we need to sometimes take that time and to recognize that. So for everyone that's present, everyone that, you know, under my sound of my voice, have a great Thanksgiving and spend time with your family. I know at my house I'm hosting this year here, and I've got a little basket in my front door that I'm telling everyone to put their phones in, their cell phones in. You know, I'm collecting them at the door, you know, and so there will be no distraction. Everyone's going to be focused on family and conversation and just enjoying each other, because sometimes it's really hard to get a lot of family together under one roof here. And so I want to maximize it. So my basket, I may have to make it bigger here, but I'm collecting it at the front door. So everybody have a happy Thanksgiving.
Are you having a big sale on cell phones on Friday then, or?
No, they can collect them when they leave.
Thank you, Mrs. Miles. Mr. Gordon?
Thank you, Mr. President. Tonight, when I heard Mr. Belker talk about a warming center, I was honestly pretty impressed. I think that's a good idea. And my hopes are that the administration listened, and if there's any possibility to help make that come true. And I'll just go ahead and say the reason that I say this is, and at every council meeting I say, be good to each other, right? And I'm going to break a rule here. I'm going to mix religion and politics, okay? But the reason that I say this is because when Jesus was asked what was the most important commandments, he said, love God and love others. And so I think this warming center is a good example, a great example of loving others. So I was impressed with that, and that's why I bring it up. I had no plans on even talking about it because I didn't know it until he said this. The other thing I had is I wanted to wish everybody a happy Thanksgiving. And lastly, again, remind people to be good to each other. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Gordon. Mr. McLean?
Thank you, Mr. President. Again, we hear this all the time about Thanksgiving, but, you know, it is a part of being our families, being with our families and giving thanks for what we have. Earlier this month, we had one on the 11th, which we thanks our veterans. Our veterans fought for our lives, fought for our freedom. Now we can thank our families that we have plenty to eat and a roof over our heads and the things that we have. So enjoy your day on Thanksgiving and think about that. Say a few prayers for the rest of us and the needy, because they are also going to be out there in the streets. And like the warming center, they may not have the heat, they may not have the roof over their heads, they may not have the food to eat. So if you can reach out and give for Thanksgiving because you have plenty, that's the idea. Also, I kind of disagree a little bit with that Aunt Mrs. Miles, because I don't think our city's broke. I don't think a lot of things are broke. I just think they may be bent. We just have to straighten them up, because we have a great city. We just need to work together as individuals to find a process that we can make a better city. And that's what I'm after. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. McLean. Mr. Lowe?
Thank you. I want to speak on several things tonight. I want to thank Mr. Houston for the information that he brought to us tonight. I've heard a couple comments, but I really think that we need to stop candy coating issues and sweeping them under the rug. They need addressed. We do have some issues. It's sad that only certain groups see it more than others. But I was involved in a conversation where an individual literally said, "I don't see color." And while I know where I believe his heart was at, it is an issue. And I looked at it different, because I had an individual ask me, if your young daughter was dating anybody of any other color and they knocked on your door, what would be the first thing that came to your mind? I'm human. I would say, he's not black, you know. There is issues. We do see color. We need to address it. We need to work together. There is some issues. I get phone calls all the time throughout the city. This is not the first time that I've heard anything like that, trust me. I usually get this maybe once or twice a month. I even had a lady call me all the way from Calida, talking about an issue that she had. People are really wanting individuals to listen, and I think we need to just make the change. We keep sitting down at round table discussions and saying what we feel and what we think should happen, and no change is happening. The biggest tool that we have for change, again, is voting. Is voting. We had over 28,000 come out in this county, and they voted the way they wanted to, and I respect it. But they only voted for a couple issues. They didn't use the whole ballot. I hear individuals say that they're tired of the way the judicial system is handling certain races. You voted for that judge to be in office, or you didn't vote for that person to be in office, which is still a vote. So, if we're gonna complain, stand up and do what you need to do to make the difference. At the end of the day, we're not doing it. Okay, so we're getting exactly what we deserve. One of the other things I would like to do is I would like to support the idea of this warming center. When I have my business downtown, I watch many mornings of individuals literally waiting to get into my door just to get a hot cup of coffee or to get their hands warm or their feet warm because they had to flop in the house the night before, or they had to flop between buildings the night before. It's sad, you know, and I had this mentality of not my city. Did they smell the best? No. Did they look the best? No. But each and every one of us is only one step away from that same situation. Do not get into a position that you think you're so high and mighty that it couldn't happen to you, or that won't happen to me. It can happen to you. And when I talk to them, some of them have some very serious life tragedies that happened that put them in the bond where they ended up losing the home. Good people, good people. Everybody out there isn't a bad individual. Let's work on that. I am in full support. I'm glad he also came tonight and spoke on that. Tonight you heard me say no on a lot of issues. It's dealing with temp services. Some say pimp services. I say temp services. At the end of the day, government jobs should be held at a higher standard, period. We have some good jobs. We'll pay the temp, but we won't pay the person. Lower it down, the difference that you would have paid, use that for their benefits, and let them have a job where they know they have some security. They don't have to worry about if they're going to work and they only got 90 days or 180 days. Or at the end of the day, our policy has all kinds of rooms. They can do what they want. Okay? So we need to hold government jobs at a higher standard than what we're doing. I do want to thank everyone that was involved. I don't want to start saying names because I might miss somebody. But I do want to thank everyone that was involved with Lincoln Park basketball courts being done. If you haven't went by there, it's beautiful. It looks great. I was out there when the gentleman had ground up some things and started marking the pavement off. It looks really, really good. And I've been informed they're going to try their best. Back in the day, they used to put the hoses on there and fill it up with water so you could ice skate. You didn't have to worry about falling through the lake. Okay, so I've had word that that might be taking place real soon here this year. Well, not too soon. I don't want to get too cold. The railroad tracks on North Elizabeth Street. Thank you, thank you, thank you. They are working on them now right by the DMV. Those tracks were horrible. They are getting fixed right now. I believe they're using the rubber ties instead of the old wood ties. So that should be a nice ordeal. And the other day I got invited to go down and represent the city of Lima at the Mega Sci-Fi Fraternity Incorporated annual achievement celebration that they have. The cities involved are Sydney, Piqua, Troy, and Lima. Spoke with several of the mayors that were there. I was so proud because Lima honored a couple people, and I know I'm going to mess his name up, so I'm not going to try. But I can tell you this, this gentleman has 2 master's degrees in teaching and cannot get a job in Lima. He has 2 master's degrees beyond the other education, and he did it within 6 years. The dude, the young man is brilliant. He is brilliant. His resume would go from here to California, but he can't come home and get a job. That's sad. That's sad. Outside of that, he's accomplished anything that a parent, a father, especially a father, would ever want in a child. He's done it. There was also Mr. Russell, a senior from Lima Senior High School. He did Lima very, very well. They honored him with a $1,000 check. And I just want to say hats off not only to him, but to Mr. and Mrs. Russell for doing a fine job with their son. One last thing. I've been really praying on this issue, but I feel I need to say it. As councilmen, we've all felt that we've been in positions where we've helped individuals and they still weren't satisfied. Whether it be personal, whether it be business, whether it be city business, we put our necks out there and we do it because we felt that this is where, me personally, this is where God wanted me to be. I can't speak for them, but I feel that their hearts are pretty much in the same place. Be careful who you talk to when you're slandering our names without proof. I had an incident that happened maybe an hour before I came here tonight. Flat out lie. Just be careful. We're here to help you. We're here to aid you. We get phone calls throughout the week. We call each other. We let each other know if an individual has the wrong counselor. And we work together. And we're doing our best to help individuals. But just be cognizant of that. Don't do deliberate things to try to break us down. We talk about building the city. We talk about issues. It's going to take everybody. All lives matter. I'm going to say that. And we need to be playing on the same team here. And with that, that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Lowe. Mr. Tevin?
Just a couple of things this evening. One thing that always strikes me is it's like 6 degrees of separation, the connections to Lima. And this Ohio State game, which was a tough game to see the Buckeyes lose, the connection with Tyler O'Connor from Lima Central Catholic was just amazing. I mean, if they had to lose a game, I'm glad they lost that one. And here's a young man who, and I went through LCC, and Father Herr always preached resiliency. And this young guy, was a star in high school and has been a backup quarterback for 3 years, gets into biggest game of the season for his team as a starter. And he worked, he learned, he persevered, and he was successful. And when you look, I see Tom Lynch on the television commercials. Admiral Tom Lynch, retired, came from Lima. Jim Lynch, his brother, from Lima. We have so many wonderful models and success stories that come out of Lima, Ohio. Yeah, it's a good community. And I have one suggestion for you, Ann, on your box. At the end of your dinner, give them all different phones. I'll bet that'll start some controversy in your family.
It'll start some conversation for sure.
Yeah. Happy Thanksgiving. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Tevin. Ms. Adams?
Thank you, Mr. President. First, I'd like to remind the public and council of a Public Works meeting next Monday, the 30th, at 5:30 in these chambers. The two subjects that have been referred to the committee was dead trees on private property to be addressed, and we're revisiting an issue that had been still in committee, the design review. I've met with them, attended their meetings, and they're ready to come before us, present us the new standards, updating that booklet. And we've made some changes and added members to the design review board due to extending their boundaries down South Main Street. So it should be an exciting and welcome meeting, and for the first of the year to go forward, hopefully to continue to see development changes and growth. And I'd like to take a moment, and I expressed this last week to Mr. Elstro, the improvements on Kibbe Street, I think has been lost to publicly acknowledge what a wonderful improvement it has been to that area of the city and of the ward. I've heard nothing but praise from the abutting property, the owners. They got curbs, they have sidewalks, they have drainage. It's as good an improvement as what was done on West Elm Street. Where I think it's gotten kind of lost is that area of the Fifth Ward has been overwhelmed with construction due to the gas company. The area streets that you would be detoured to off of Kibbe, there's the gas company's contractors tearing up the sidewalk, the streets. You might leave one way from your home and you couldn't get back the same way in the afternoon. It got very frustrating due to their mobility and moving and working in the area. But the improvement has not gone without being appreciated. And hopefully it's the first of many to occur in that area, but it's a great start, and hopefully with improvements, expansion of Bell Fountain and that area of development, Kibbe Street will more than pay for itself when all that traffic is diverted to Kibbe Street. But what a great timing for that to occur. I drove it for the first time Friday, even though there were still some road closed signs up. I was told you can drive it from one end to the other, and felt like I was in a different place. It is grass is growing.
Where?
Growing there. I don't know what seeds they used. It could be mowed technically, some of it. But again, thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Ms. Adams. Mr. Glenn?
Yeah, I got a couple motions to make real quick there. First motion we're gonna make a motion to Safety Service Department Committee, that we will be looking at the COP officers and have them come in on a date.
Second.
Okay.
The motion and the second is to refer the issue of the community-oriented policing program to Safety Services Committee. Is there any discussion?
Mr. President,
Mr. Geiger.
if Mr. Glenn's intent was to refer the issue referenced by Mr. Houston, that motion won't cut it.
No, we're doing a 90-day review, 65-day review.
No, amend it to include
Okay,
I'd suggest law enforcement.
law enforcement methods.
okay, law enforcement method, okay. Thank you. So move, okay.
Second?
Second.
Boy, Tony.
Motion and the second is to refer the issue of law enforcement methods to the Safety Services Committee. Is there any discussion? All those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed? The motion carries.
Also, another motion we'll make to the Human Resource Committee about temp service in the city of Lima. Had an opportunity to talk to Howard and Law Director. I came up with some method that we see where we can work with that. I'd like to make a motion to send this to Human Resource Department,
Second.
Committee. I keep saying department.
The motion, the second, is to refer
Temp service
temp services and alternative methods
methods
to
to
the Human
Human
Resources
Resource Committee.
For hiring.
Is there any discussion? All those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed?
Okay.
Motion carries.
I get to the good stuff. First of all, I want to thank Councilman Miles. She did an excellent job, excellent job. Very warm speak. Thank you so much. I got a lot of folks talking about it, and I thank your husband, too, for coming out. And it was very fantastic. I'm going to get an opportunity to look at our leaders. I would like to see all my kids come up here right now, all the kids that helped out our future leaders. Come on, guys, come on, come on. You know the role we played? Let's go, let's go, let's go.
Mention your Thanksgiving dinner.
Yep. Mm-hmm. Can I take coats off? We got a few minutes, guys. I just want to make sure we show what our kids can do for our Thanksgiving dinner. Come on, kids, come on, come on, come on, come on. These kids work real hard. Their parents, and I just want them to let them see you publicly. So I love you guys. These are our future kids. They will be having a big pizza party. I just want you guys to give them a hand because they work hard. Thank you guys. You guys will have your pizza party tomorrow, okay? All right. I just want everybody to see you guys, but they did an excellent job. Right? And I'd like to make sure we recognize our kids who, and their parents who brought them, and we want to make sure we continue working very hard, allowing these kids to take part in everything, a lot of things in the community, and we're going to continue doing that. Again, these are our future, and we'll keep moving in the right direction and make things happen. Also tomorrow, we'll finish up phase 4 with the turkeys and the chickens tomorrow, and that'll be done at 11 o'clock tomorrow. We got a few more people that called in and didn't get their turkey or chicken, so we'll make sure to get that. It's been a long, long drive on that. We had a lot of folks came out for that. We brought them in from not from Allen County, they came from Wapak, everywhere, all Hardin County. So this is something we get in real good and happy to help people. And I heard a lot of talking there, but we got to work together. You know, it's a lot of work, And I know a lot of folks will be sick and tired of these roundtable discussions. Let's be a doer. Let's make it happen. And I continue saying that, though. And like Gordon always say, we all want to be nice to one another. Let's do that. Let's keep that in mind, you know, because these kids are watching. They're watching. And we want to make sure that, because they're the future of Lima, Ohio. Our future already been here and about ready to go on, because we're already up in age right now, but that's our future right there. And I'm proud of the parents that allowed them to continue motivating. And I liked the Miss Miles' speech because it was so warm and filling about our future there. So we got to stay on these kids and keep them moving, get them involved. Everybody, give opportunity. You see a kid, keep them involved with it. Same with you parents. I thank you guys so much that you taking time out. And a lot of us on a small budget, it's tough to continue doing it, but we make it happen though, you know. And I got to talk to my wife tonight, and she want to continue trying to find ways of bringing more people involved. The job thing they had at the Civic Center, you know, we had a lot of folks going out there trying to get jobs and stuff. You know, a young lady trying to get a new home, we out there assisting. I knew someone she can call and help her out too. I called Tim Stanford up, said, give us help. Let's do these things. You know, we don't want to be number 7. We want to move. We want to give out that whole thing there. But that come a part of all us working together and trying to work the problems out fast and quick as we can. We can't afford to allow the problems to stick around and continue to stick around. 'Cause our babies is watching this show. They're watching this HBO show. So we want to make sure they see some good. You know, they see a future here, and they're going to stay here in Lima. That's my main goal. If I want to see my kids come back here to work, you know, because we want to keep Lima moving. A lot of our kids, we've been here for a long time. This city been a long time. And Mom could tell me good things that happened here for her and Dad when they was here. And I wish everyone a happy Thanksgiving. Keep my dad in prayer. He hanging in there. He fighting this battle. And Dad, they got him looking. So he's seen the babies, and he's smiling right now and giving me a thumbs up. That's what we're going to do all the time. But Dad, you're going to get well, and I can't promise I'm going to bring you home for Thanksgiving, but I'm going to do it very hard trying to get you home for Thanksgiving. Thank you, guys, and everybody have a very happy Thanksgiving.
Thank you, Mr. Glenn. I just have, I guess, a couple of things. Mr. Elstrode, I was hoping Saul would be here this evening. Is the leaf pickup completed, or are we starting another round?
Mr. President. Mr. President, councilors, the street division has completed the first round of pickup of the leaves. However, there will be a second round. So anyone who has leaves remaining and wishes to put them at curbside may do so during this week or this weekend. The final round will begin next Monday, a week from tonight. It's anticipated that that second round probably will be just a matter of days, 3, maybe 4 on the outside. There are still bags available, and you still may bag your leaves and put them at curbside at this time of year as well.
Okay. And I assume that that's all dependent upon snow
The S word.
and the amount of snow.
We checked into it, and we're not going to have hardly any snow this year, so I don't
Okay,
think that'll be a
Good,
factor.
Yes.
good, thank you. That's
hope
great
not.
news. Great
And by
news.
the way, Mr. Saul Allen does have the salt bins completely full, so if there is any concern,
I know there's a
we
catch
are-
to it.
we
For
are
next
ready.
winter, right?
For-
Okay,
yeah.
good.
There's a catch to it.
I was also hoping he would be here because I had the opportunity to actually see the leaf pickup process, and, you know, it's pretty fascinating to watch it. I remember the days when it was just the big vector that went around and sucked up the leaves, and now the process they go through is, I think, probably a lot more efficient, and they did a nice job. I also wanted to say that I had the opportunity to attend the Walter Potts Bridge dedication yesterday, and I thought he put on, you and your team, and he put on a very good dedication ceremony. If you haven't had a chance, I'm gonna probably get in trouble with people at the United Way, but pull in their parking lot and go look at the plaque on the bridge.
That's beautiful.
I'm not gonna recommend stopping on the bridge from your car and looking at it, but it really is a very, very nice plaque at either end of the bridge honoring Walter, and I think that this might be an occasion that if we had to go into executive session to discuss what that plaque said, he might actually vote yes.
He will.
But it was really nice.
Yeah, it's a
and,
beautiful plaque.
It was just a good deal. Other than wishing everybody a happy Thanksgiving, and good luck with your cell phones there, Mrs. Miles. That's all I have this evening.
If they
Mr.
want to eat, they
President?
got to get rid of cell phones.
That's right. That's right.
I move the
Mr.
Lima
Tibbetts.
City Council adjourn until 7 PM on December 7th in these chambers.
Second.
Long time.
The motion on the second is the Lima City Council will adjourn until 7 PM on December 7th in these chambers. Is there any discussion on the motion? All those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed, motion is approved, and we are adjourned.